I asked 30,000 people to rank the worst generation. And I don't want to sound too clickbaity, but one of these results legitimately shocked the hell out of me. Hello and welcome to the Groundline Review, your source for everything One Piece. My name is Liam and I am a millennial, which I believe makes me part of the worst generation because everyone hates us. But we are not here to discuss my personal insecurities, and instead I'd like to talk about the good worst generation, the ones with all the pirates and stuff. And quite specifically, I would like to know who is the best of the worst. And there are a lot of videos ranking the worst generation which have surfaced on YouTube, including one from me, where I ranked all of them according to the very scientific criteria of my own personal opinion. However, this video is not just the opinion of one dude in one room. That's two. This is in fact the collective will of thousands of dudes in thousands of rooms, because I opened up a rank choice survey asking all of you wonderful Grand Fleetians to rank the worst generation members in order of your favorite to least favorite. And over 32,000 of you took up the task, resulting in a lot of crazy placements and trends that I simply did not anticipate. Before we get into the stuff though, this video is part of September, where for the entire month of September, every time someone subscribes to this channel, we will be donating 10 cents to Make-A-Wish Australia, a group who work to grant life-changing wishes for children with critical illness. Children like Hamish here, whose very wholesome wish was to play with huskies in the snow. So I want as many of you to hit that red button as possible, and there's also a link in the description to our fundraising page if you'd like to donate directly. Plus, please do say hi in the comments below if you are a new member of the Grand Fleet. Welcome. Let's get straight into business though, because in last place we have the worst of the worst generation, SCRATCHMEN APOO. And I guess we're going to sacrifice APOO here and use him as a bit of a tutorial level, because the way this poll works is that characters were awarded points based on where survey takers ranked them. So for example, if we had a poll featuring Mihawk, Weevil, and Meevil, then whoever you put first would receive 3 points, second place 2 points, and so on and so forth. We then do that another 32,000 more times and come up with an average score for each contender. In this worst generation poll, we have 12 options. So the TLDR is that the closer a character's average score is to the number 12, the better they did. And with that in mind, SCRATCHMEN APOO did rather abysmally because his average points awarded were 2.94. Ooh, that's not good. And this is because APOO is very bottom heavy, as almost half of all voters decided to plonk APOO in either 11th or dead last place. That is a statistic that no other worst generation member even comes close to equaling. APOO is undisputedly the least liked of our gaggle of pirates here. And as for why this is, it's probably a combination of wacky design, weird and sometimes ineffective powers, as well as him generally being, a bit of a prick. And to contextualize that further, less than 500 people ranked APOO in first, second, and third place combined. Less than 500 out of 32,000. I don't know what else to say, it's pretty garbage. Moving on to slightly better news, in 11th place we have Mad Monk Arouge with a healthy improvement in popularity over APOO, and many of his stats are fairly similar. However, the big difference here is that Arouge doesn't have anywhere near the overwhelming level of last place finishes. If I was to be honest, and I probably should be, I would have expected Arouge to be in last place, purely because he's one of the two worst generation members that have had no real relevant story time to flesh out a character. At the moment, Arouge is a guy who is there, wherever there happens to be. 10th place gave me a bit of a shock though, because here we find one BASIL HAWKINS. I actually thought that he would be way higher because he's quite a relevant character right now. He has a cool enough design and very, very intriguing powers, to me anyway. But then you look at his stats and oh man, only 139 people put HAWKINS in that number one spot, which to be clear is less than both APOO and Arouge. Which means that if this was just your standard pick your number one favorite dude guy kind of poll, then HAWKINS would currently be in last place. However, the big thing that elevates HAWKINS out of last place is that just under 7% of Grand Fleet members decided that he was worthy of such a dishonor, as opposed to the 21% of Arouge and 35% of APOO. At polar opposite ends of the scale, HAWKINS is definitely less liked on top, but also significantly less disliked down the lower end, if that makes sense. For significantly more likage, in 9th position we discover the morphalicious jewelry BONNEY. Another surprise for me, because I honestly would have expected BONNEY to be either last or second last, and that's based purely on her very minimal story involvement thus far. However, what BONNEY demonstrates in these numbers is more of a neglected character. The majority of survey takers awarded her a spot somewhere between 7th and 10th place, and I will say that 330 people did rank BONNEY in first place, which is actually really strong for this lower half of the worst generation. If this was a simple name became your number one favorite poll, then BONNEY would have been in 6th place based on this result, which goes to show how top heavy this group is. There are some very clear favorites, and characters like BONNEY, when it comes to votes, are unfortunately more or less fighting for scraps. But from scraps to fine dining now, 8th place is occupied by family man CAPONE gang BEGE. And he's a very interesting one because he does stand quite firmly within the 6th to 9th range. However, CAPONE also has a very high proportion of voters who slapped him with that ever terrible last place. Roughly 9.5% of voters decided that CAPONE wasn't quite for them, which is more than BONNEY and HAWKINS. And it's understandable, I suppose. He is a bit of a weird one because he's not a traditional fighter, he may have a bit of a polarizing design, and in general he just might not provide that raw excitement that many One Piece fans are looking for. I like him quite a bit because he's a malicious and scheming mofo. But at the same time, I'd say that 8th is probably about where I would put him as well. In fact, thinking about it, my favorite thing about CAPONE is his family. I love Pez, Chiffon, the Fire Tank Pirates, and so on, so CAPONE on his own may not be the greatest of selling points. Moving along, we have the very neutral-faced Diaz Drake in 7th place, and I have to say that his stats very much reflect this neutral nature. There is no single area where Drake excels or fails, and I will say that startlingly few people put him in first, however, also very few threw him into last. Drake's votes were spread very evenly across the 5th to 9th range, and he's certainly the most middling worst generation member we have. The numbers would say to me that, on average, people just don't hold any kind of strong feelings towards Drake, and he may be very difficult to rank as a result because he just sort of needs to fit somewhere. But there's no strong feeling as to where, which I do think is demonstrated with his broad indecisive numbers. For a big decisive shock to me, now let's head into 6th place, which is occupied by Massacre Soldier Killer. And this result is the exact reason why I believe that ranked choice polls are so important. Here's a wild fact. Killer received by far the lowest amount of first place results. Only 103 people cast him as their number one, which means that Killer would have been dead last in any poll that just asked people for their one and only favorite. And there is a pretty big discrepancy between 6th and 12th place. So it's very nice to know that Killer is actually this appreciated. Killer is exactly where he should be because a whopping 20% of all voters said that 6th place was about right, with very impressive accompanying numbers in 5th and 7th respectively. And this is the sort of poignant decisiveness that Drake was missing. Killer is a sleeper character. He doesn't have a hardcore army of fans, but there's a general, potentially even unconscious consensus that he is well liked, even if he never really rises to the narrative prominence that our top 5 do. Speaking of, let's rip into that, and we find ourselves with a dank, dark Blackbeard lurking in 5th place. Certainly the most outsider member of the worst generation, but he has performed far beyond my expectations in this poll. And what I mean by that is that almost half of all voters ranked Blackbeard somewhere between 3rd and 5th place. What? I have never known Blackbeard to be this popular, because he always seems to sink to the bottom of the character scum bucket when it comes to these polls, and I should say that he does have quite a powerful segment of anti-Blackbeard sentiment, as just over 11% of all people assigned him with dead last place. There are only 2 characters who received more 12th position votes than Blackbeard, and they were of course APOO and Rouge. And it is frankly astonishing that with such a high percentage of last place votes that Blackbeard came anywhere near the top 5. Even more so than Killer, Blackbeard is a sinister sleeper character. He's always there, lurking powerfully in people's preferences. It's just that the loud anti-Blackbeard voices online and the relative lack of strong support as a favorite gives us the illusion that Blackbeard is disliked. However, that could not be further from the truth. But now, slamming our heads into the brick wall of 4th place is the very questionable Eustace Kid. I'm not at all surprised that Kid is in 4th place, however, I am very surprised at how he got here. For someone who made his way into 4th, Kid doesn't really have a whole lot of hardcore support. In total, only 636 people voted for Kid in 1st position, which is half of the number who voted for Blackbeard in 1st place. And when it comes to Kid, the fanbase seemed to have a very clear consensus, with over 50% of you throwing him into either 4th or 5th place. Kid is essentially a solid final pick for some sort of 4-man squad, but only after you've exhausted all of your, good options. Kid's alright, so I guess we'll take him as well. I mean, he's better than the Sky Monk, the Pizza Chick, and the guy who probably plays his penis as a musical instrument. So welcome aboard, Eustace Kid. We are happy to have you because you're not them. It's time to step up into the heavy hitters now, because the worst generation members up until now hold absolutely no weight compared to our top 3, and the bronze medal recipient will be Trafalgar Law. I will say that I am very surprised that Law's first place votes weren't higher. I mean, he did quite respectably, but Law's real power comes from the 2nd to 3rd place voting block, where he achieved over 60% of voter appreciation, 42% of that coming from 3rd place specifically. However, the crowning achievement of Law is that he has the least amount of last place finishes. Only 70 people out of 32,000 said that Law was their least favorite member of the worst generation. And of course, I'll tell you right now that both Luffy and Zoro had more last place finishings than that. So Law, look, you're not the most popular. However, you are the most least not popular. So that's the thing. To Silver now, and I think this is quite expected at this point, but it is of course Zoro. And this is where we will start to see some of the vote-sucking machines, because almost 85% of all Grand Fleet members put Zoro somewhere in their top 3. However, I should say that Zoro comparatively underperformed in the worst generation ranking, with his first place votes dropping by 5 to 6% from their total in the Straw Hat ranking poll. And my hypothesis for this is that a huge chunk of Zoro votes were diluted by Law's presence, because Law performed far stronger in 3rd place here than Sanji did in the Straw Hat poll, taking in an extra 5% of first place finishes and a massive 10% extra 2nd place rankings. So in the future, I would be very interested to see a poll featuring both Law and Sanji. So green hair and sharp objects are just too good a combination on this occasion, although still not quite good enough. Because as we've all figured out by now, the winner of this poll is our Captain Monkey D. Luffy, by quite a disgusting amount as well. In fact, he thrashed this poll even harder than the Straw Hat one. Here, Luffy convinced over 55% of you to put him in first place, as opposed to the 45% of the Straw Hat poll, which I think shows that when you don't have the Sanjis, the Robins, the Usopps, and so on until they've named them all, when those characters are out of the equation, more people are willing to throw their support behind Luffy than they are Zoro. However, in quite a fascinating twist, I must report that 310 people voted to put Luffy in last place, which is more than Zoro, Law, and even Eustace Kid. So my suspicion is that this may have been a handful of people actively trying to skew Luffy's votes and trying to prevent the obvious first place from happening. But maybe not. Maybe I'm just paranoid. In any case, it doesn't really matter because we have our final ranking, and Luffy remains undisputedly on top, according to all of you wonderful Grand Fleet members. And as a reward for your wonderfulness, here is another video. It's about One Piece, and I'm fairly certain that you like One Piece, because there's always more to learn, explore, and experience with this wonderful series, so I look forward to seeing you there.